Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight I have another Dump the Corruption show. Our topic is, does the court know what it ought to do or should do, of course, with respect to the Supreme Court case dealing with the claimed immunity of Donald Trump. I'm going to get right to the article because it's an excellent article by Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern. Let me present it. Again, the title is The Supreme Court Knows What It Must Do with Trump's Immunity Ploy. This is by Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern again. And this was dated February 6th, 2024, 2:07 p.m. It's from Slate. And there's a picture of Jack Smith and John Roberts. And the caption is, the fate of Trump's prosecutions could come down to the man on the right. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit sharply denied former President Donald Trump's claim to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for his role in the January 6th insurrection in a Tuesday decision that tees up what's likely to be an imminent showdown at the Supreme Court. The justices must now decide whether to halt the new ruling, an act that seems likely to push Trump's criminal trial past the 2024 election, or allow proceedings at the trial court to move forward at a pace that might affect the election's outcome. In theory, this call is purely procedural. In reality, due to the compressed timeline here, it may well determine Trump's fate. If the former president persuades the justices to freeze the case before Judge Tanya Chutkan for months, then wins the election, he will undoubtedly exploit his office to scrap the prosecution. Once again, SCOTUS holds his fate in its hands. It does so on the very same week it will hear a different case about his removal from the ballot. By the way, most of the pundits think that the Supreme Court will decide for Trump in the case about his removal from the ballot. I won't go into that just now because that's a different case. But while it's impossible to predict how the justices would handle what would otherwise be a straightforward case of presidents not being kings, there is reason to think a majority of the justices might kick the can down the road far enough to help Trump evade accountability before November. Such a move would be indefensible. The former president's arguments are not just weak but trivial, and even this hard-right court should not debase itself by pretending to take them seriously. The question is not whether a majority will ultimately agree with Trump, it won't, but whether a majority will abet Trump's efforts to run out the clock, it might. The bench slap he received on Tuesday, however, makes that craven move harder to pull off with a straight face. That is the bench slap he received from the D.C. Circuit Court. Despite the complaints about the slow pace of its drafting, Tuesday's 57-page decision by a three-judge panel of the D.C. Court was a showing of forceful unanimity. The panel consisted of Judge Karen Henderson, a conservative George H.W. Bush appointee, alongside Judges Florence Pan and Michelle Childs, both Joe Biden appointees. During Trump's presidency, Henderson was sometimes sympathetic toward his efforts to stonewall investigations into his alleged misconduct. Just last month, she indicated her ongoing support for affording broad executive privilege to Trump. But the breadth and implications of this case pushed the notion of executive power too far even for her. Henderson joined Pan and Childs in an unsigned per curiam opinion, speaking for all three judges in one voice, and that voice rejected all of the former president's claims in the strongest possible terms. Trump's central argument in this case is that the Constitution prohibits Special Counsel Jack Smith from prosecuting him for his alleged participation in the conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election. Trump claims that the separation of powers, quote unquote, grants him, quote, absolute immunity, unquote, from criminal charges pertaining to any, quote, official acts, unquote, he undertook in office. Specifically, he says, his efforts to alter various states' vote counts to undermine Biden's victory marked a mere effort to safeguard the integrity of the contested election. Smith's indictment cited these gambits as the basis for charging Trump with conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, quote, defraud the United States and undermine voting rights. According to the former president, the indictment is illegitimate because it's based on the executive's protected, quote, discretionary acts, unquote, as opposed to, quote, ministerial acts, unquote. The D.C. Circuit panel wasn't buying any of it. The court rebuked Trump's efforts to downplay the severity of his alleged crimes, quote, former President Trump's alleged efforts to remain in power despite losing the 2020 election, unquote, the court wrote, quote again, were if proven an unprecedented assault on the structure of our government, unquote. The court also rejected the notion that attempting to subvert the election and void its certification amounted to a series of, quote, discretionary acts, unquote, inherent to the president's power that are, quote, insulated from judicial review, unquote. Trump, in short, lacked any lawful discretionary authority to defy federal criminal law, and he is answerable in court for his conduct, unquote. And, quote, it would be a striking paradox if the president who alone is vested with the constitutional duty to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, unquote, or the sole officer capability of defying those laws with impunity, unquote. The court's reasoning boiled down to a simple proposition, quote, at bottom, former President Trump's staff would collapse our system of separated powers by placing the president beyond the reach of all three branches. This position was, you may recall, taken by Trump's attorney, John Sauer, who was asked at oral argument in his appeal whether presidential immunity would prevent the prosecution of a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent. Sauer was unable to explain why it would not. As is the case with other lawsuits racing to hold the former president to account before the November election, the legal niceties matter almost less than the temporal ones. The D.C. Circuit Court gave Trump just 6 days to appeal the ruling before it allows Judge Chutkan to continue preparing for trial. He can seek review from the entire D.C. Circuit sitting on bank, but the full court can reject that request quickly. Trump can also ask the Supreme Court to weigh in and halt the lower court's order in the meantime, effectively freezing his trial until SCOTUS renders a decision. When called upon to weigh in by Trump, the Supreme Court will have 3 likely options. First, it can deny the stay and refuse to take up the case, and it should. To grant the stay at this juncture, the court must decide that Trump has a significant shot at success on the merits. But he doesn't, and it's not even close, as the D.C. Circuit has shown. So granting a stay would require distortion of the usual rules to make a special accommodation for Trump only. A terrible look for a court already thrust into the vortex of politics. And yet, there are good reasons to believe that many justices will feel that a lower court should not have the last word on this matter, that the highest court in the land should step in with a definitive resolution. This case is, after all, both a neutron bomb launched into a presidential election and a consequential assault on settled principles around the limits of the separation of powers. So the court's second option is to grant the stay, take up the case on an expedited basis, as it did with the ballot disqualification dispute, hear arguments soon, and hand down a decision by June. Even this quick timeline, though, could make it very difficult to Chutkan to hold the trial before November. After all, the Justice Department has an unwritten rule not to take any action within 60 days of an election that could affect the election outcome. This trial could take at least 2 to 3 months, bringing the proceedings perilously close to Election Day. Third, the court could summarily affirm, issuing a one-line decision that simply says the D.C. Circuit Court got it right without holding oral arguments. If the court does want to issue the last word here, though, it seems unlikely to do so without lengthier consideration and explanation. It seems, as Professor Steve Vladeck has noted, that the justices must either go all the way in or stay all the way out in this instance. We are thus reduced to counting votes, as we did in the run-up to arguments in Bush v. Gore, and also to counting minutes, as we did after arguments in Bush v. Gore. Taking up a case requires 4 votes. Granting a stay requires 5 votes. Summary affirmance requires 6 votes, though in rare circumstances the court will issue one with only 5 votes. If we assume the liberal justices want to deny a stay and rid themselves of this case fast, the case likely comes down to Chief Justice John Roberts, as well as Justices Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, and perhaps Neil Gorsuch. Clarence Thomas' wife attended the rally that preceded and egged on the insurrection, and he, along with Justice Samuel Alito, has frequently voted to shield Trump from scrutiny. Thus, the less extreme conservatives hold the former president's fate in their hands. So that's it. A very good analysis of what the possibilities are, and a very good analysis of who the key justices here who are going to determine the fate, of Donald Trump. I can add that Chief Justice John Roberts is likely to be able to get, I think, Amy Coney Barrett with him on this. And maybe Brett Kavanaugh. I don't think, though, that Neil Gorsuch, well, if he got those three, it would be 6 votes. If he had 6 votes, they could do a summary affirmance. If they had 6 votes, then the other side wouldn't have the 4 votes that's necessary to take up a case. So it looks like it's going to come down to John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh. I don't think Gorsuch is going to figure in here. It's a foot race then between the law and the clock. And while the former stands squarely against the former president, running out the clock isn't just his only play. It's pretty much been his superpower. The 9 justices are aware of all this, just as they are aware that deciding the outcome of the 2024 election in advance of the nominees being named was not really the thing most of them hoped to do with their judicial careers. There are turtles built in the architecture of the Supreme Court building, and throughout history, the justices have prided themselves on the slow and deliberative nature of the judicial project. Like fine wines, the law cannot be rushed. They're now presented squarely with the case, asking whether the executive branch is beyond the reach of any check or balance, including the course itself. The implications of allowing that challenge to drag on through the summer will almost certainly result in the wrong legal outcome. The court will have decided, perhaps without ever deciding to bless, both the monarchic vision of Trumpism in 2020 and the future monarchic vision he now seeks. So that was a beautiful article. It outlines the alternatives very, very well. Of course, we don't know what the court will do, but they will be deciding Trump's fate, I'm afraid. Now, I want to fulfill a request of Stephen Wolfbrand, but last night, specifically, he wanted my take on Tucker's interview, of Vladimir Putin. Well, Steve, here's my take. It seemed to me it was a wonderful interview. There was much of it, or some of it anyway, that was a conversation. There was much of it, that was a monologue of answers by Putin to Tucker. But Tucker asked very, very good questions. I thought the interview was a friendly interview in terms of its tone. I thought Putin was extremely friendly, really very respectful, of Tucker. And Tucker was very respectful, of Putin. I also think they liked one another, and that was clear from the interview. Now to the substance. Here was a conversation that our diplomats should have had with Putin at some point, or that our president should have had with Putin at some point, preferably before the Russians marched into Ukraine. It would have been wonderful had the president or Tony Blinken done the diplomatic work before pushing on the Russians and forcing Putin to take the only reasonable the only reasonable response to what was essentially Western aggression at the time of the attack in February of 2022. The Russians could see the Ukrainians preparing to attack the Donbass and to start doing the kind of thing that Israel has been doing in Gaza. If he wanted to save his fellow Russian ethnics, he had to respond. And he did respond, but the whole thing could have been saved if in December of 2021, if Biden had talked at length with Putin, it wouldn't even have required an in-person meeting. It could have been handled by Zoom. It could have been a 2-hour meeting by Zoom with our diplomats and the president asking Putin the kinds of questions Tucker asked him. Why weren't our diplomats doing their job? Why weren't they finding out what Putin thought? He was quite willing to tell Tucker what he thought. He's been quite willing to give speeches at various meetings inside of Russia where he basically explained what he thinks and what his vision is. He's been really quite open about it, but not in outlets that have been visible to the American people, because the press would not go to these foreign venues and cover his speeches to people there where he explained what was in his mind. People from the alternative press have gone there. There are academics who've gone and who could have heard those speeches and would have known what Putin's thinking was like, and did know this. But somehow our incompetent State Department officials didn't know anything about the way Putin thought. This interview certainly revealed the kind of thinking Putin does. Revealed also the depths of his thinking. It revealed the grounding in history of his thinking. It revealed his broad knowledge of history, not simply Russian history, but the history of Eastern Europe, the history of Russia's dealings with Germany, and above all, it revealed what a deep thinker Putin is and how competent Putin is, and how much understanding of the West he has had. His foreign policy actions haven't been based on ignorance of the West. They've been based on a profound understanding of Western arrogance and stupidity, and incompetence. I think this interview revealed all that. Steve says, I only wish Tucker would have asked Putin about UFOs and the Gaza war. Other than that, it was fantastic. Yes, okay, I agree. I don't know whether Tucker is that well informed that he could have done a good job on the UFOs. He probably certainly could have done a pretty good job when it came to questioning him about, okay, the Gaza war. And then we would have had a very good impression of what he thought, uh, what he thinks, okay, about that. Uh, okay, but I believe that it was much more valuable in a way uh, to find out what Putin thought about Russia itself and where it was going and how it was coming together. In a broadcast earlier this evening on the Judge Napolitano show, Scott Ritter was asked for his take, okay, on the interview. And Scott said, and I agree with Scott about this, that what Putin was doing in this interview was opening up his heart to the external world about what he wanted to see happen. And also that he was opening up a window onto the Russian soul. Now, Scott, in his work, has been talking a lot about the Russian soul, okay, over the last month. Okay, okay, and uh, has been talking about, the Russian soul, okay, at length. Okay, and he thought that the interview by Tucker gave the whole world, if they were willing to listen, okay, a glimpse into uh, what Putin thinks about when he thinks of the Russian soul. I think Scott was right. That was the impression, okay, that I got. I was very impressed with Putin's composure and handling of the situation, and what I consider to be very honest replies that revealed his internal feelings about what had happened, what the various causes were, and what also the the various effects were. Uh, so Steve has a few more comments. God bless Tucker. Who would have thunk he would be a hero? Well, he was certainly a hero for going there, and a hero for getting the interview. Okay, and a hero for being honest in his interactions with Putin. I think Tucker reacted in a very honest and open way to Putin. And I think that's why they liked each other, because Putin was replying in kind. Steve points out Tucker is actually very interested, okay, in UFOs, as is Joe Rogan. Uh, yes, I think that's true, but I don't know that. Uh, well, I just don't know whether he would have had the level of expertise to follow a good line of questioning towards Putin, okay, about that. Steve says that half-hour history lesson was amazing. I think what was amazing about it was that the head of a state would be that steeped, okay, in history. It is such it's so much, okay, at variance with the education and history that our presidents have. Okay, for myself, I wasn't really so amazed at the history lesson because I studied Russian history for a year in undergraduate school. And I got that history. I was aware of that history. And in my studies of international relations, both in graduate school, in undergraduate school, I was fairly well familiar, with the histories of the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century, and also the 20th century, and Russia's role in terms of its participation in Europe in those particular centuries. I was very familiar with the Tsars, of Russia. I'm very familiar with the founding of Russia, by the Rurik dynasty, and what became the seat of its government in Kiev. I'm also very familiar with the history, or I was anyway, of the Rurik dynasty, and very familiar with the time of troubles and the accession, of the Romanovs to the Tsardom, of Russia. So I knew that history fairly well. And if I was going to talk to somebody about history, as Putin planned to do, uh, then I probably could have given that sort of briefing, not perhaps with the feeling that Putin introduced, into the subject. He was obviously very steeped, in the history, and it was very, very meaningful to him because it was the history of his culture. He's very, very oriented to the culture, of Russia. He's very much, an ethnic Russian. And that means a lot, to him. And this is a big, big difference between Putin and the leaders of the Soviet Union, who were steeped, in Marxism, but not so steeped in Russian history, and Russian traditions. I have the feeling Putin, is a religious man, that he's steeped in Greek Orthodoxy also. Even though he came out of the Soviet Union, he retained, a lot of the feeling for Russian traditional things. They were not destroyed in him. And that was another fascinating thing about, this interview. In many ways, I think Putin is a throwback to Tsarist times. I don't think he's thinking of recreating the Tsarist empire, or anything like that. But I think he very much respects the history of Russia that came out, of Tsarist Russia. He's very steeped in that history and the cultural traditions. And that supplies a lot of his motivation. I thought another outstanding part, of the interview was when Tucker asked him about what was his attitude towards the idea of attacking Poland. And he was very convincing in his reply that he had no interest. Why would he have any interest in doing that? What would he gain by attacking Poland and the Baltic nations? You really got the impression that what he was thinking about there was all the trouble that would bring. And why would he want that kind of trouble when he can turn to the East and he can do business with the Chinese and he can do business with the Central Asians who are interested in dealing with Russia. And yes, he can do business in the Middle East also. He can do business in Africa. Why would he want to worry about Poland? So there were many fascinating parts, okay, about the interview. I saw it once. I'm going to watch it again and look for other lessons from that interview. It's just very, very important uh, as a window into Putin's thinking, okay, as a window into Putin's self, and as a way to gain a better understanding of what Putin is like and what he values and what he treasures. Yeah, I watched the whole 2 hours. I was just fascinated. I watched as much as I could last night before we had to go to bed, and I watched the rest of it first thing in the morning. Okay, this morning. I finished it actually before my 10 o'clock show, which, by the way, went down in flames due to a technical error. But anyway, yep. Okay, I got it all done this morning, and I was just terribly, terribly happy with it. And I know the other people who've been talking about the Ukraine war uh, and what has happened there. I saw Scott Ritter's reaction to it, on Judge Napolitano's show. And I started watching Larry Wilkerson reaction to it, which was interesting also, but I didn't get sufficiently deeply into it before I had to come here. But there are also reactions from Larry Johnson on there, okay, and the Ray McGovern Larry Johnson Roundtable that Judge Knapp has on Fridays. Okay, there's also that. Okay, that's already come out. I don't know whether he's had a chance to talk to Colonel McGregor about it, but I'm sure he's going to be doing that as well. And he'll probably be talking to Jeffrey Sachs and John Mearsheimer about it too. And we'll get all of their reactions. And then we can come to a better evaluation. I've only given it just a few minutes here because I haven't had time to prepare anything more formal because I want to get a lot of other reactions. But I am really pleased as punch with this particular interview. And I thank Tucker Carlson for going over there and doing it, and for doing it in such a competent way. He was just excellent. I mean, just excellent. It ranks up there with any of the Barbara Walters interviews of heads of state. Tucker did a good interview podcast. He said it might take a year for him to digest it. I can well believe that. I can well believe that. I think this interview raises the stature and also reputation of Tucker Carlson tremendously, because he was obviously open to what Putin had to say. And I think Putin was open to what he had to say. So it was a very open exchange during this interview. And that was very valuable. Okay, I don't know if any other commentators or analysts, are going to get a chance to do this. Okay, I would love it if Scott Ritter got a chance to interview Putin. Uh, okay, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Or for that matter, if Ray McGovern got a chance to interview Putin. I can see that would be very funny as well. But anyway, I think that was quite exciting. Okay, so I have to go now. I'm going to join Dee for her 9 p.m. show. And after that, I'm going to call it a night. Steve says exactly uh, uh, analysis, hey, my friend. Well, thank you, Steve. I think that's a compliment. But I'll be back with further analysis on this because it certainly bears further analysis. I may well do some of that on my Tuesday show because, well, I don't know. The Tuesday show, there's been a blizzard of stuff that has been coming about the Trump cases. Okay, and there's some very, very good analysis. I did only one of the articles tonight. There are two other very excellent articles on this that have come out. One from Slate, and one was on the Atlantic, but appeared in reader-supported news where I picked it up. I don't know whether the Supreme Court justices are likely to read these posts. Okay, but they should. Okay, they certainly should. But anyway, I need to go now. So thank you very much for coming. And I will probably see you on Dee's show tomorrow night because I usually go to her Saturday shows. And I'll also be on her show tonight. But then I'll be off for a couple of days, and okay, I'll see you on Tuesday with my long show. I still haven't really decided whether it's going to be on the Putin interview or whether it's going to be on the very interesting analyses, okay, that are appearing, okay, of the Trump cases. But we will have to see. So thank you, Steve. I'll see you soon.